Alright, so now we're going to go on to two more, both kind of being music related, I guess, but in totally different ways. I figure we'll start with Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, which was being built up, obviously, as Chadwick Boseman's kind of swan song. I knew it was also going to be a big showcase for Viola Davis. What I didn't know until really late, somehow, was that it is based off of an August Wilson play, which obviously is very good news for me because of how crazy I am about fences. And if I had known that, I probably would have been significantly more hyped for this, for just as much as all those other reasons. So, going in, obviously, Davis is going to be playing a big figure, much like how she won an Oscar for the last August Wilson adaptation. And she's in this opening scene, and of course she's playing this, the big real life figure that was considered like the mother of the blues, basically. And she's already kind of established herself in such a big way in this opening scene that it feels like at the end of the day she's not even in the movie that much. But when she basically establishes her dominance over the movie and kind of looms over it like invisibly for most of it, while we're focusing on all the other characters who, for this first portion here, are just kind of waiting for her to arrive in this recording studio, and that's when we meet pretty much the rest of the characters, because obviously with the play setting it's going to be pretty confined and have kind of just a handful of major characters. And that mainly, apart from like the powers that be that are in charge of everything, even though technically Ma Rainey's the one that's in charge of everything, but we have the rest of the band, and this is Chadwick Boseman surrounded by others. But for a while here, it kind of takes a minute or two before Boseman kind of really takes front and center, since they all kind of blend together as a group and the way they bounce off each other and the conversations they're having and all that. But it doesn't take long for Boseman to establish that when Ma Rainey's not here, he is the biggest presence in the room. And he's going to make sure that everybody feels that way. Where he's the kind of guy that, he's constantly talking and he's constantly building himself up, and how he's got all these ideas, particularly about the music, how he's got like his own arrangements and stuff like that. Basically trying to call the shots himself, and there are cases here where you can see, like maybe intentionally or unintentionally, he's channeling Denzel every now and then, who's obviously a producer on this. But as it goes on, and this, once again, this really isn't that far into the whole introduction, we kind of establish a bit of an unpredictability that his character has. Like, his moods will change drastically, very quickly. Where it's like, when he's talking about, all the stuff he's going to do and how big he's going to be or whatever, how far his music's going to go, he's got kind of like that sly smile on his face. But then you never quite know which direction that smile's going to go, to the point that every now and then it almost kind of has a sinister quality to it. And then he'll go in like some really dark direction, or we'll get some monologue about his past, or something to that effect. And of course, being, mainly August Wilson dialogue, these speeches are going to be practically legendary. Like, you think about the scenes in Fences where Denzel's talking about, like, when he wrestled with death, or the I don't have to like you scene, or stuff like that. Viola Davis's big scene there. This is like, Wilson was basically one of the gods of like speeches and monologues, and Boseman gets the biggest of those. And there's two in particular where it's almost like the movie pretty much stops for him to have these. And while that could seem, a bit theatrical, and like it's not quite breaking out of the play roots, it's still, particularly the first kind of monologue he has about when he was sliced across the chest at a young age after his mom was assaulted. And I feel like it was shot in a pretty cinematic way, for being obviously a monologue that clearly came from a play. And they kind of handle that a lot, but at the same time, kind of on the opposite side of cinematic, we do get these shots when we're kind of seeing the rest of the band members for the first time, and they're first getting there. and we see these exterior shots where like the sun is like perfectly placed between buildings, and like everything looks really. It feels like it sets, you know, a pretty relatively vast setting, more so implying a vast setting. But it does also feel like it kind of has this fake quality to it, like the fake backgrounds you would see on like a stage or something. And I would feel like that has to be intentional, where it's like, because the whole thing is you also see criticisms about movies based on plays because they still kind of have that confined quality, and it almost feels like you're just watching a filmed version of the play. But it's like, even though they're not actors, the characters in the movie are still performers that use a stage. So I almost feel like it's like an intentional embrace of, since they're still performers, why not just what what's to lose by having it still feel like it's just on a stage like the whole time. So if that is the case, I thought that was actually really well done, where it's almost like it intentionally feels confined like that, and maybe sometimes not so much cinematic, but more so like it's just on a stage, and that's perfectly fine with me. So, and another person that's among these other band members is the piano player, who is Glenn Turman, who I just talked about in Fargo, and who's kind of had a pretty busy career this late into it, which is great. And he's also gotten, I think he's already won a critic award or two, and he obviously doesn't have like as showy of a role as say Boseman or Davis by any means at all. But he's definitely this sort of constant presence that's always there, and when he does have these moments to shine, he does get a nice monologue of his own about the whole leftovers thing. But he's also here that it seems pretty clear that he's almost like a warning to Boseman about how, like, almost dreaming too big, and the idea of like hitting dead ends. And it's like there's just those cases where sometimes you can think and have these ideas of just how far you're going to go and how far this is going to take you. But especially being black and in the time period that it's in, he's much more likely to hit those dead ends than he may be too arrogant to realize at this point. And Glenn Turman's character is kind of where those dead ends end up, where you end up once you hit all of those dead ends. But once again, he's pretty much just way too full of himself to see that. Um, and then eventually, once we see just how big Boseman's character is, and Davis is kind of looming over the movie, we're just kind of waiting for that moment that they're inevitably going to collide. But the thing here is that the thing about Davis is that she doesn't, just kind of in general, she doesn't always work for me. Sometimes I think she's a little too, like, she's one of those actors where you can constantly see the actor wheels turning, and it may not always feel as genuine as it probably should, or as authentic as it probably should. But when she is, like, when I am really drawn to what it is that she's doing, I'm like glued to her. Like, there's no middle ground. I'm either like, I'm not really into this performance, or I'm just completely and totally glued to her every move. And I think it's easy to guess which one this falls under. And it's, like I said, when we're sort of waiting for them to collide, their first scene, it does feel kind of it is brief when they first meet, but then when we get later into it and we see these giant personalities clashing, and I was talking about how she seems so big when she's not even in the movie. She's just this invisible force, like to the point that she makes such a big impression. She's gonna be remembered for being in the movie longer than she actually is, for sure. Um, but then once she actually is here, you would think that would be a lot to live up to, like a lot to live up to that presence that's around when she's not here. But you can just sense her growing bigger and bigger as a presence the longer she's on screen. Even through these, as she's getting all her demands met in this very diva-like way, through these really energetic montages, and some of which are extremely outlandish, but she immediately establishes that everybody here works for her, and she works for nobody at all. Like I said, even if the powers that be are technically the ones in charge, she's never gonna make it seem like that's the case. Um, so that's where the real meat of the story is, and there's really not that much beyond that because the movie's only like an hour and a half, which is actually kind of the perfect length. And I don't really remember, because the performances, big and small, hook you so much. I don't really remember any dry spots in that hour. And it seems like, there'd be less of a risk for dry spots in an hour and a half. But once again, given the small setup and like the play-like structure, it is really performances and dialogue that have to keep it going. And in that particular case, an hour and a half can be a long time. But that never felt like, and like I said, especially with those monologues that just really sort of immerse you in ways that monologues rarely do, and like rarely, you know, Wilson had a way of doing it that was really felt like its own unique thing. It's almost like you can know exactly where it comes from just by hearing the words without even knowing who the author is right away. And those pull you in enough and hypnotize you enough that it's the whole experience of it feels quite swift. um, but that doesn't the swiftness by no means softens the impact in any way whatsoever. Like when they really give you a chance to relish in the really really big moments, especially for how long the monologues go, which is great. And we talked about the first big monologue he has. There's another big monologue he has, and there's the whole thing where it's what's gonna really suck and what's probably gonna really end up pissing me off is that obviously Chadwick Boseman's like at the head of the best actor race right now for this, and I just know that a lot of people are gonna think that that's for the obvious case that he is no longer here. But the thing about that is, number one, posthumous Oscars are a lot more rare than people seem to believe that they are. And secondly, this is absolutely a case where that's if I would almost put anything down and say that if Chadwick Boseman were still here, he would still be right where he is in the Oscar race right now. Like nothing would change that. I don't think. Um, like I said, this is the kind of stuff that's right up there with, say, Denzel's performance in Fences. Like the thing that's really tragic about this is not only that we won't get another performance from him, but the idea of seeing him with this kind of material, and it's like I would have just one I would have just taken one chance to see him and Denzel like together in scenes like this with material like this is something that I will forever wish that we had gotten to see. Um, but it still kind of feels like we get it a little bit with Denzel sort of behind the scenes. But even so, taking that into account and real life events into account, where this other monologue involves him talking about, basically in a sense, the idea of God turning his back, and how that's kind of repeated, and the way he really goes in on it. It's like it just feels like it's undoubtedly coming from a real place of sorts. It's like maybe that's a place where you can say that this performance would be a different circumstance if he was still alive or wasn't going through that at the time of the performance. But you can definitely see this. Like I said, I don't think that would have changed the outcome of this much at all. But in this particular scene, would be the one instance where it does feel like it's coming from a place that almost uncomfortably real. But it's obviously with that impact here, and the fact that it's preserved without Emir still is it just feels gigantic. And like I said, even this small setting, it's almost like the contrast makes it feel even bigger than it is, rather than almost like it's too confined to the one setting. But yes, and then of course this is all ending to without saying too much. a pretty unexpected gut punch of an ending. But the thing about it is, one of the things that makes it such a gut punch in the moment is that it feels like it kind of comes from out of nowhere, like really abruptly and really suddenly. But the kind of brilliant thing about it is, once the movie's over and all is said and done, and you're kind of looking back on it, and there's like all the conversations they had and all the metaphors and all of the symbolism and stuff like that, that you kind of start to do the math and realize that that moment at the end may have been inevitable the whole time. So yeah, so I really love this a lot. Maybe not as much as I love Fences, but this, I do think this is really great. And like I said, this whole idea of, adapting Oz Wilson plays, if this is the kind of quality we're going to keep getting out of that, then for God's sake, don't stop. Because after it ends, and you just kind of let it go on Netflix, the autoplay takes you to that documentary that's like a half an hour, about like the history of Ma Rainey herself, like the real figure, and then the making of it, and there's kind of a tribute to Bozeman and how they all talk about him. And this little documentary was the first time I got to look at the director, George C. Wolfe, because I wasn't really familiar with him, at least by name. But then, like, as soon as I saw him in the documentary, it's like, this is a guy that has, like, energy and passion for days. Like, you can just tell. And that really comes through in the movie also. I was a little concerned when, because obviously, Denzel directed Fences, so it's like when this started and it was a director whose name I didn't recognize right away, it was like, well, that might be a little concerning. Like, I don't know who this is. I don't know whose hands I'm in. And then it's like this, like I said, that energy and passion that he clearly has is definitely there. And they talk about some of the changes they made from the play that kind of add much more of a, almost kind of a visual depth to the kind of material that they're working with. And it's just for me, pretty much all of it works. So I was really into this, and like I said, any awards recognition that it gets, I strongly and firmly believe will be strictly based on merit. But yeah, so that's how I feel about that. And then going into Sound of Metal, which I actually, you want to talk about going in with a high bar. This I don't believe is a movie I had really heard of until it was already winning awards. So, like, Paul Race has already picked up a couple of supporting actor things here and there, and Riz Ahmed's really in the best actor race right now. And it's just getting a lot of raves going in. And I saw, like, one, like, sentence outline of the plot, which kind of hooks you right away, even with just that. The idea of this drummer that basically lives for his music until he starts going deaf, in which case he is most likely going to lose both that passion and that gift that he has. And what's interesting about this also is there's kind of a second layer of that we learn pretty quickly, where he was a heroin addict who's been clean for like 4 years. And I initially misinterpreted the character, I think, as it was going in like the first half hour or so, because his hearing loss comes in pretty quickly, like maybe in the first 10 minutes, if that. And the way that I initially interpreted it was that because he's told, obviously, that he's, playing the really loud music and he's a drummer, and like this is obviously gonna make his hearing's already gonna go no matter what, like pretty much entirely any time now. And if anything, playing the music is just gonna speed up the process, which he doesn't want. But the thing is that he's basically at a point in his life where he has no choice but to play, because like what else is there? And the way I had initially taken it was the heroin was one addiction, and now the music is another addiction, because it's a thing that he knows he shouldn't be doing, and it's literally harming him in the worst possible way, but he just can't help but do it anyway. But I think it's less that the music is like an addiction and more that it's pretty much the exact opposite, because as we learn more about his character throughout it, it's more like the music is what got him away from the heroin to begin with. So if anyway, drums are the one thing that's keeping him away from the thing that was initially pretty much taking his life away from him. So that's why he does need the music, and why it might be worth making this ultimate sacrifice for, at least as long as it'll last. Um, and then we're told a lot through like visual characterization in these opening scenes. Like you basically just kind of have to look around, and these character stories are being told to you without them having to do like really ridiculous exposition or stuff like that. Like just look at his tattoos, or just look at her scars, or stuff that's around their trailer that they live in and travel in and go from gig to gig in. There's the way they have to set up their own merch places, and we kind of see that whole process, and just how exactly this sort of just how like on their own they are, doing this thing with their band, the two of them, him and Olivia Cook, his girlfriend, and then eventually the sound starts to kind of tell the story, in a very direct way, in an unexpectedly direct way, because I had heard that the sound was being praised like right before I went into it, and yeah, the fact that it's used so well, in not just a storytelling perspective, but from seeing things through his point of view, where we kind of hear things the way he hears things when it feels kind of muffled, and then when it's pretty much gone completely, there are a lot of scenes where we just kind of watch in silence, to get the idea. Like, there's even a moment where once he gets to the facility that he eventually goes to, where he kind of has to learn to basically live with being deaf, and he's sitting around a dinner table, and they're all signing to each other, and the scene is like totally silent, and it's only when there's a cut and we kind of hear them, like we hear dishes and we hear their movements and all that, and by the contrast of the silence, it's actually quite loud, even though nobody's saying anything. And the interesting thing about that is then that's when we realized that when we had the total and complete silence was us getting it, from his perspective, which is how they handle it the rest of the way through the movie. And I was talking about it with a friend afterwards, and the comparison I used was Memento, as far as like Memento style of the backwards thing, where it's like when a scene starts, we have no idea where we are, and it really puts us in the main character's perspective because he has short-term memory loss. And it's like I feel like the way the sound is used in this is like some of the best and most creative ways of putting us directly in a character's point of view since the backward style of Memento put us in the point of view of somebody with short-term memory loss. Like that's the level of the effect, and the way they throw in some of these other details, like the absurdity of him holding his phone to his ear, even though he's pretty much completely deaf at this point, and how eventually he has to get used to just laying the phone on the table to talk, because there's just, even though this is what you're just so used to, there's just like it's just absurd at this point. And just there's little things like that, and then there's also stuff that continues the sort of visual characterization, like when he's first at the facility and he's like got his first meeting where everybody's sitting in the circle, and clearly he's out of place because he's new and he's the only one that doesn't know how to sign yet. And they do this thing where everybody in the circle is sitting just kind of normally with like their legs apart, and he's the only one that's like sitting with his leg crossed, and it's like you just kind of, just in this one image, you get the sense that he's the outcast. Like even if you just walked into the movie just now, you immediately know who the outcast is. I suppose you could also take that from his appearance a little bit, because he's got the appearance that kind of goes with, you know, the music that he plays and that whole lifestyle, or whatever you want to call it. Because the writer and director, Darius Martyr, is one of the co-writers on The Place Beyond the Pines, and Riz Ahmed's appearance may very well give you a flashback to Luke Glanton, Ryan Gosling's character in The Place Beyond the Pines, as far as his appearance, and the fact that that also kind of, it almost kind of felt like he was an outcast in kind of the same way, in that sort of subtle, unspoken way. And obviously with the setup of the movie, a lot of things in this are going to be subtle and unspoken. And that just honestly, they find a way to really find the power in scenes like that, especially from Race's performance in general, because he is not deaf in real life. Apparently, he had deaf parents, and that's how he's deep into this community and knows kind of the ins and outs of it and how to. You can tell how much this was committed to being as accurate to the deaf community as possible with all the deaf people partaking in it, or the people that are as familiar with as Racy with the community in general. But he is so incredibly convincing. I did not know until after the fact that he is not actually deaf. I would have sworn up and down through the whole movie that he was actually a deaf actor. But he's about as close as you can get without actually going with a deaf actor, from what I can tell. And they clearly made the right choice here. And there's just something so incredibly real through this whole performance. And it's one of those performances where I think his absolute best moment is probably his very, very last moment before the scene cuts, and that's the last time we see his character, where he just exhales in a way that's like one of the most heartbreaking moments in the whole movie. And that's all it is. It's just like an exhale. And it's probably one of the most powerful moments in the movie. And it's, in a nutshell, it's that kind of performance, which I'm assuming you get. So, and the great thing about it also is the way we kind of see visually the way Riz Ahmed's character doesn't fit into the group. Is we eventually just kind of we're kind of observing with him when we kind of see how when everybody's signing and it's not subtitled or anything, and it's we the audience are just observing, because that's all we really can do. We can't really communicate in any other way. And then there's this, at some point there's this transition where as we just slowly see his progress, it kind of turns into, now we're alone as the observers, as he kind of starts to basically become one of them, and he eventually learns to sign and all that. And that progress is shown the same way that it was when he was an outcast. It's just sort of unspoken, and you just kind of observe, and then you can see how things get from one way to the other, and the way he kind of grows as a character into this environment. And one of the key elements of him growing into this environment is this idea that Brace's character gives him of basically having to sit in a room alone, obviously in silence, and basically just write. And the thing about that is, it's this great contrast of scenes as far as the movies go. Where the movie goes at the beginning, when we have the scenes with the music, where it's obviously those scenes are really loud, and it's before we start seeing it through his perspective in that sense. And it's you can tell the anger he is with the situation, the anger he's playing. So the angrier he is, the louder the music gets. And of course, the more his hearing going to go in that case. And to contrast that with just the silence of being put in his perspective, where the scenes are going to have no sound at all, and he just has to sit in this room and basically deal with it and learn how to live with it. And it's almost it's kind of as the audience, we're being tested as an audience, kind of in the same way of, after having had those scenes where everything's really loud. These scenes where we just kind of have to sit in silence and kind of, learn to live in that silence and appreciate that silence, really. And to kind of see, find the peace in it. And it's it's really an immersive experience, the whole movie is. And like I said, the way they use the sound, there's a scene on a slide that's really particularly moving, probably one of the most moving scenes of any movie this year. And it's really, when you look at the content of it and the concept of it, this would have been something where it would have been really easy to go the melodrama route. But it pretty much avoids all of that entirely. Like, it finds a sort of tone that it's going for and sticks with it the whole time. Um, and it's like that. It would have been so easy to kind of make, especially Riz Ahmed's performance and his character, like, really big and angry about it. Like I said, really the most anger we see is when he gets to channel it through playing, which he's only doing in the first 10 or 15 minutes of the movie, and then he has to just deal with it from then on. And all the different and subtle ways we see his emotions as he goes through this just kind of feel like a natural progression through the whole thing. Or, like I said, just with hardly any dialogue, where he is in the community by when we're reaching the end versus when he first got there, and how he's able to convey that. Just everything feels so authentic and natural and all that, and so empathetic to the community also. Um, and we do eventually get to a point where once he goes to the facility, obviously Olivia Cook pretty much leaves the movie, and then like with maybe in the last 20 minutes or so, there's going to be a return of her character, and it's kind of what's the thing where this kind of falters is that we've been doing this thing the whole time, where it's all sort of like visual characterization and visual storytelling and all that. And then this last 20 minutes or so, they introduce a new character that basically this character's purpose is to basically show us how different he and Olivia Cook are, and how different their places in life were before they got involved with each other, and after they kind of parted ways so that he could go to the facility. And I don't really think that's entirely necessary. Like, the whole movie kind of just grinds to a halt when it's getting close to its finish because of this scene. And I don't know. I feel like you could take the whole scene out and then just kind of go to him and Olivia Cook reuniting, and the point would still be there and get through without any dialogue whatsoever or any interaction whatsoever. Um, so that was kind of... It's just kind of weird that scene's there. But, yeah. But it does still manage to find its way to a really, really nice final scene that just really finishes the movie off in this really great way. Um, so yeah, I pretty much love this also. And like I said, both movies are extremely sort of immersive in their own different ways, um, and show off the way you can use music in movies in different ways. And I guess you could almost say confined areas also. Obviously, that's much more the case in Ma Rainey, but still. And obviously, both have incredible performances that should be seeing awards, or at least close awards contention throughout the next couple of months or few months or whatever. So I think that's all I have to say about these. So I think the next two are going to be Nomadland and Promising Young Woman. And we're really kind of getting, like, at the end here, we're getting like a really good batch of movies here. So, because at this point I've already seen Nomadland and Promising Young Woman, and I will pretty much have nothing but praise for those as well. So, we'll just keep going with that. So until those, I think that's it.